I am Megan Larmer from Slow Food USA, and it has been a real pleasure and education to get to conduct these webinars with various experts over the past few weeks. We've dug into topics about food and faith, about the wide-ranging implications of antibiotics usage in the poultry industry, and all of this is growing out of the slow meat gathering that happened in Denver, Colorado last June. Part of the purpose of the Slow Meat campaign is to open up a safe space where everybody who's affected by the food industry, in other words, absolutely everyone on this planet, is able to work together to look for better ways to raise animals, to support farmers, and to feed the planet. It has been really, really exciting to open up this space, this virtual space, and welcome even more people into that conversation. So today we've got a really, really distinguished group of panelists joining us who are here to help try to demystify the complicated world of food labels, and especially the labels that you would find on meat packaging. So leading our discussion is Angela Huffman of the Humane Society of the United States, and she's joined today by Kerry Balcom of the American Grassfed Association, Andrew Coriolis of Farm Forward, Urvashi Rangan of Consumer Reports, and James Robinson of RAFI. We're really, really grateful to have them all here, venturing bravely into this technological world that is a little tricky at best. Before we begin, I just want to note that in the spirit of the slow meat community, these webinars are a place where speakers are encouraged to be candid and forthright about their perspectives, to engage in productive dialogue with each other. And so in that space, we just want to note that the opinions and perspectives they put forward are their own. They may or may not represent the positions of Slow Food or the organizations they work with. So we have only got an hour for this conversation, and we want to make sure to give time for everyone listening and watching to ask questions as well. If you have a question during the webinar, you can just type it into the chat box that is at the bottom of the GoToMeeting control panel on your screen if you're calling in from your computer. We'll take note of these and answer them at the end, or we will also, again, call for questions at the end. So that is enough of me talking. Angela Huffman, I would love to invite you to begin the conversation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar. I'm Angela Huffman from the Humane Society of the United States, and I'm really excited to facilitate a discussion on food labels with some outstanding panelists. So to avoid food from factory farms and choose products from sources that adhere to higher animal welfare standards, we need to know where our food comes from. That means who raises the animals, how they are cared for, and what their diets consist of. At the Humane Society of the United States, we like to encourage people to know your farmer or know your labels. If you know your farmer or rancher, you can either ask about their practices or visit the farm for yourself. But shopping in the grocery store, on the other hand, can be pretty confusing. There's such a wide array of labels on meat, dairy, and egg packaging. Some of those labels do indicate higher welfare conditions for animals, but others are meaningless or downright misleading. We're very fortunate to have 4 experts here with us today to help demystify these labels and help us make choices that are consistent with our values. So to get started, I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves and give a brief introduction to their work regarding food labels. James, would you like to start?
Sure. Thanks everybody at Slow Food for putting this together. This is really, I think, a great venue, and if we can get the technology worked out, which it looks like we will, then this should be a lot of fun. Again, my name is James Robinson. I work for the Rural Advancement Foundation International. RAFI is the acronym that we are known by. We're based in Pittsburgh, North Carolina, and we've been around since the 1930s in several different incarnations. We've been incorporated as RAFI since 1990, 501c3, and the core of what we do is counseling with farmers that end up in some form of financial crisis often. And that may take the form of sitting at the kitchen table with a farmer to try and work out a business plan. It may mean going to a lender with a farmer and advocating on that farmer's behalf. And it may mean going through USDA NAT appeals. And every other piece of programmatic work that we engage in is an effort to see fewer farmers end up in crisis. And labels are an important tool that farmers can use to make sure that they have long-term financial sustainability. And that's one of the reasons, one of the many reasons that we think labels are important. So as farmers do things that are good for the environment, and as they do things that are good for animals, if they have that reflected in a label that has integrity, then they can access a premium price in a market. And it can be, again, a tool that farmers use to support their long-term financial sustainability. And so that's why it's important to RAFI into the work that we do. And with that, I will turn it over to the next panelist.
My name is Andrew Coriolus. I work at Farm Forward. We're a nonprofit. We do work on farm animal welfare. We promote mostly food choices, conscientious food choices that are going to reduce animal suffering and promote sustainable agriculture. So that's very broadly. More specifically, we're working on a project called Buying Poultry, which is a new website to help consumers learn about and make sense of and find higher welfare poultry products. You know, the market out there today is really difficult for consumers who want to find better products, and there's really good information that says consumers have a lot of pent-up demand. They're looking for good products. They're looking for meaningfully higher welfare products. And today it's really hard to find them, not just in stores, but it's hard to differentiate between all of the marketing claims, legal claims, certification claims, etc. And so we've launched this new website as an independent label guide to make it easy for people to find not just what certifications mean or what labels mean, but also what products sold in the stores nearby them sell those products, so they can find very easily, you know, a chicken or turkey product, let's say, or you know, a dozen eggs that match their values. So we're really interested in labels and have been focused on poultry labels for quite some time. You know, without consumers being able to act on their intentions and do that genuinely, it's very hard for advocates or for farmers or for anyone working in the food space, whether it's a retailer all the way down, to really justify carrying better products and investing in the kinds of farming systems that I think we all want to see. So I think labels and having consumers understand what labels mean and having tools to help them differentiate the labels are all really critical components of helping build and support a high welfare, sustainable food system. So with that, I'm happy to talk more about some of the labels and buying poultry later, but I'm happy to turn it over to others.
Ravashi, would you like to go next?
I'm the Executive Director of the Food Safety and Sustainability Center at Consumer Reports, and I've been here for about 16 years starting with labels, and I still do label work among a lot of other things. I'm in charge of our food safety testing. I'm in charge of our label ratings, which we've been doing for about 15 years, and like Consumer Reports and how we rate things, we develop a set of criteria and we sort of run the labels through and actually rate them. We also spend a lot of our time advocating in Washington and in some cases at the state level where it's appropriate for non-trans so people know what they're buying. We advocate on labels that have to do with production practices. We watchdog the organic standard. We make comments there once a year at the National Organic Standards Board meetings. And we've actually been looking at labels not just in food but in other spaces like personal care products and cleaning products. So we actually have a lot of experience looking at labels in lots of different areas, and I can kind of make some comparisons across the board. We also have a national survey department, so we're able to survey people on what they think a label should mean, what they expect it to mean, so that we can document how much consumers are being misled, what they're looking for in the food supply, if they're finding it, and what they expect labels out there to actually mean. And we try to take that information back to the government to sort of set a bar on where consumers are, so that labels like natural, for example, which don't mean very much on meat, aren't thought to somehow meet anyone's expectations, because they don't. So that's the kind of work we do. It's sort of wide, but we look at labels broadly, and we also incorporate our rating information into our food stories that we do in Consumer Reports. We will also build our sample pools in our testing programs. on different labels as well and segment them into different sample pools in order to see if there are other intersections between safety attributes and sustainability. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Ravashi. So, Carrie, would you like to give a brief introduction to yourself and your work?
Well, my name is Kerry Balcom, and as you can see in the background, I'm at my mother's ranch in South Florida, and I'm in the front pasture. You'll see a donkey and a horse coming up here shortly. I'm been the executive director for the American Grassfed Association for the last 13 years. As you can see, I grew up in the country, and have just recently taken up a position with the Global Animal Partnership. So kind of double duty at the moment, and working with the grass-fed label claim. Urashi and I worked on that together in 2003, and supporting local ranchers and farmers. So that's where I am, and looking forward to answering any questions that you guys have.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we'll jump right into a discussion. I've got some questions for you all, and then we'll have some time at the end to take questions from the audience as well. So first of all, let's talk about the natural label. This is one that we see everywhere. And so what does the natural label really mean when we see it on animal products?
So hi, I think this is me. Yeah, Angela? Okay, so what the natural label mean on meat is that nothing artificial was added to the cut of meat itself. It really has nothing to do with how the animal was raised or what it ate or whether it was physically altered or whether it was confined. In some cases like poultry, whether it ever saw the light of day. It simply doesn't have to mean any of those things. According to our survey data, people think natural means no antibiotics, no pesticides, that animals went outside, that they were free to roam, that they ate a natural diet, that they led something of a natural life, and yet really none of those things are true. And that's why, in large part, we actually have a campaign going on to ban the natural label, and we've asked the USDA to do that, as well as the Food and Drug Administration. When we've surveyed people about what they think it means, and we ask them too about their expectations on organic, you can see that people start to define things very similarly. We know there's even more when it comes to meat, like animal welfare practices that need to be included in natural, but they're nowhere even close. And so in that way, we think the natural label at this point and the standards behind them fall woefully short of where they should.
So we'll move on to the next question. Another popular label is the organic label. So I was wondering, what are some pros and cons of the organic label, and what does that label mean in particular for animal welfare?
Sure, I will give that a try. So it's, I guess, a good thing to sort of compare to the label that we just talked about, the natural label. When we compare the USDA Organic label to the natural label, it holds up very, very well. A strong label that has third-party verification, and there are legal standards behind it. There's public participation in the process. In the creation of this label, it does things like, ensure consumers that there wasn't synthetic toxic pesticide exposure to farm workers. It ensures that that wasn't used in the production of their food. This is a non-GMO label, so if you buy something with the USDA Organic label on it, you can be ensured that this is a non-GMO product. Those are some of the pros. There are cons. It's a label that has not yet incorporated social justice standards into the label. There's really more that can be done to define animal welfare within the label. This is why sometimes you'll see the USDA Organic label on a product, and you'll also see an animal welfare label on that same product. Right now, I think one of the things that would be necessary to improve the animal welfare standards for the organic label would be more animal-specific standards. Right now, if you were to change the organic standards to strengthen the welfare regulations, you would really need more animal-specific regulations so that we, didn't just say like animals need access to outdoors. It would be specific to the species. There are NOSB recommendations, this National Organic Standards Board, that would do some of this, that would improve some of these animal welfare standards, and they are pending USDA action at this point. And I think with that, I'll sort of leave it there and see if any of the other panelists want to jump in and mention anything else.
Hey James, just to jump in quickly, I think organic also deals with drug use, and there is some intersection in terms of really, if you're managing drug use well, you have to have some animal welfare practices in, and organic farms do have to put in a farm plan to discuss how they are managing manure, for example, or other hygiene issues. To James's point, it needs more standards to it. It needs more specifics, but it isn't void of those things either. But I just wanted to mention that it also does deal with drug use as well, and really minimizing drug use in production.
And from the perspective of pasture-based, the organic standard has a mandate in it for 120 days on pasture or access to pasture, and it allows the feeding of grain, which but those things are being addressed through the organic standard, but it is addressing a lot of issues with animal production, and so 120 days with access to pasture is a good thing that they finally put in, so I'm pleased with that.
From our perspective and from how we deal with this on buyingpoultry.com, organic producers, there's a lot of really good organic producers out there with great practices, but the organic standards themselves, specifically for poultry, as James and Urvashi have sort of alluded to, from our perspective, don't go nearly far enough on animal welfare for that to be a really robust certification from a, really from a welfare perspective. It's not clear that animals can't be modified, or that they get to go outside, or that it doesn't address in any way the genetics of the birds and how healthy the genetics are. It does prohibit cages for laying hens, which is a step in the right direction. And as Urvashi says, it does prohibit the use of subtherapeutic antibiotics, which is great, but without additional changes and standards around the specifics of husbandry, our concern is that there are some more or less bad actors in our mind within the organic poultry world that are, I would say, not necessarily representative of all organic producers, but maybe representative of the largest organic, let's say, egg producers that are most widely available in the market. And so from our perspective, products that carry just a certified organic label don't really go far enough to address animal welfare concerns, and on buying poultry aren't graded very highly, unless they carry an additional certification from a more stringent animal welfare certification.
We had a question come in from the audience regarding, Urvashi is responding, regarding whether drug use refers to both antibiotics and growth hormones.
So I was trying to clarify, certainly when I talk about drug use, we are sort of speaking generally about all drugs. I think a lot of people out there think when we talk about antibiotics that those are the only drugs used in animal production, and the listeners are well pointing out it's not just antibiotics. There's hormones, there's steroids, and again, it depends on what type of species you're talking about. There's ionophores, there's things that like ractopamine that are beta agonists that are neither antibiotic or hormone, but they're used for similar purposes. Arsenical drugs were fed to poultry until a very short time ago, and they don't really fall necessarily into those classical camps of classification. So when we evaluate labels, we do break it down into human antibiotic use for growth promotion, for disease prevention. There's actually a lot of sort of matrixed analysis to be done. But that said, at the end of the day, if you're feeding any drug to healthy animals on a daily basis, then we think there's something wrong with the sustainability of that system.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you all. Let's move on to poultry and eggs. There are many different labels we see on those products: cage-free, free-range, pastured, many more, I'm sure. Would someone like to sort of talk through the difference between those and what's meaningful and what isn't?
Sure. Why don't I jump in and at least get us started with this one? So the real problem with these is the difference between how most consumers interpret the claim and actually how these claims are verified. You know, giving, let's say, poultry access to pasture or access to outdoors, these are good things. These are things consumers want. These are things that animal welfare experts and animal scientists think are good, improve the lives of these animals. The labels themselves, however, unless they are accompanied by a verifiable third-party animal welfare certification, can be either dubious, misleading, or difficult to tell, and they sort of fall somewhere in that spectrum of gray. Cage-free, we'll go through specifically. You know, there's sort of two major product categories where you see the claim cage-free. One is on meat products, and when it appears on meat products, the claim is more or less entirely deceptive. Poultry raised in America today are almost never raised in cages. They're raised in large open houses on the floor. So that claim, if it's included, let's say, on a package of chicken breasts, is accurate, but is deceptive because it's trying to tell you something about that product that's already happening by default of what's happening in the industry. For laying hens, you know, getting laying hens out of battery cages is incredibly important. There's no question about it. Now, what that gets replaced with is a big question. When you take birds out of cages, what's the substitute? Do you put them on the ground? Do you put them in these large colony cages? Do you put them in these things called aviaries? There's a variety of different systems that producers can move to once they've gone cage-free, and some of them are better than others. You know, the real things that we want to make sure that birds are provided, that hens are provided, laying hens are provided, are things like nest boxes and ability to have privacy and ability to scratch and dust bathe and exhibit their natural behaviors. And so getting them out of cages is a great first start, but we want to see these other sort of environmental enrichments, is what they're oftentimes referred to really improve the welfare of these animals. For free range, it's, again, difficult to tell. For eggs, that claim is very unreliable as far as I can tell. I don't think the FDA regulates it really at all. The USDA, which has control sort of over the meat labeling side, free range is a little bit more meaningful, but can mean as little as 5 minutes of outdoor access a day. It could mean, you know, for a chicken barn, it could be a barn of 40,000 broilers, birds raised for meat, with small pop-hole doors on one side of the barn that lets them out into a concrete enclosure, which the birds may or may not use. And from our perspective, because most of the birds raised by sort of standard industry are very unhealthy genetically, they grow very fast, they don't necessarily have the ability to really take advantage of outdoor access. They don't walk well, they don't fly well, they can't really be outside and enjoy it. So free range or free roaming are also, without other things, in our mind, doesn't go far enough. And then the last claim, pasture raised, as far as I can tell, again, this claim is not regulated at all by the USDA. And we think raising birds on pasture is great. If they're healthy and their genetics are good and they can be outside and live on pasture, then they should. And but without being able to verify that with a certification, it really isn't as meaningful as we want it to be. And again, all three of these claims, cage-free, free range, and pasture raised, unless they're accompanied by a third-party animal welfare certification that really verifies how those claims are being executed and the actual husbandry standards that are being used on those farms, we don't think they're meaningful enough. Why don't I leave it with that? I think Urvashi might have something to add about the details of how some of these get regulated, or maybe not.
I mean, Andrew, I think you did a great job. I think that those are actually pretty accurate. I think just to underscore something that you said, and it's something even I have to keep reminding myself, is that the labels on dairy and eggs are not regulated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They're regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. And so, you know, Carrie and I worked in 2003 for 5 years with the USDA to get them to put a decent grass-fed standard in place, and yet all of that work has nothing to do with the grass-fed claims that anybody sees on dairy or eggs. In fact, those have no definition whatsoever. So that's just an important note to that even when there are just even these little slivers of standards on meat or more robust standards on meat, that those same claims don't necessarily apply to the dairy and egg products that those same animals come from.
Mm-hmm. Totally. One more thing.
I'll actually underscore one of the points that Andrew made earlier about most of the birds being raised in the country for meat are not raised in cages, and I think it's worth sharing some data on that. So according to the USDA Census of Ag, 97% of the broilers, the birds raised for meat in the country, are raised in these large-scale confined poultry operations. And so that means essentially every chicken you might ever find in a grocery store would fall under this cage-free label. And so it really is a fairly meaningless label. And I think it's important for consumers to know that it's a fairly meaningless label because grocery stores will do things like mark up the price on something that has a label like that by a couple of cents to a couple of bucks in effort to make a little more on what is supposedly a premium product, but a cage-free chicken is just not it's not a thing. 97% of the birds in the country are cage-free. If they're grown conventionally, if they're in the 3% that's not, they're probably also cage-free.
It's just
one thing I might also.
Sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
I was just going to say, actually, we've been talking a little bit about certification versus verification, and how these claims are verified, and I wondered if that wasn't something worth clarifying a little bit. That when we talk about these claims being verified, really what we're saying is that a company submits something to the USDA or the FDA asking for approval to use a certain claim, and they have to provide usually an affidavit or some other documentation about it. But the claims are not verified by somebody on the ground. An auditor is not going out to these farms to make sure that some of these conditions are met. So one of the things when I'm saying things like they're verified maybe, but they're not certified by independent third-party certification, the real critical piece there is not just the standards of a certification are clear, but that someone is going to those farms to make sure, on a regular basis, be it yearly or every 16 months, whatever it is, that those standards are being followed, and so that birds really do have access to the outdoors. They really are free range. They really are pasture raised, and so without that third-party audit and without these organizations that we can sort of rely on to know that they're going around and kicking the tires on these farms, it is very hard to tell that a producer may be following what they say about those standards with regards to, let's say, free range.
And I'll weigh in here. We don't have AGA, American Grassfed, does not have poultry and or pork standards, but with ruminant standards, when you see grass-fed on a package of meat in your grocery store, they're verified and they're certified, and AGA certified. You have to have a third-party independent audit every 15 months to use our label. So with the USDA, it's a matter of paperwork. It's not a matter of verification of auditing type thing. We do audit every farm that carries our label. So thanks for bringing that up, Andrew. That was important.
The difference between grass-fed and grass-finished when we see that on beef packaging.
Well, grass finishing does not have any legal definition. And you'll see you'll see that on the label, and it's allowed, but there is no verification or auditing or certification for grass finished. It supposedly, according to people that are trying to use it, means that it's been on pasture its entire life, but grass finished can mean a lot of different things. So be wary. If you look at our website, our communication director did a great piece on what grass finished means, and it does not have any legal definition. Grass fed does have a legal definition, which means that it's been raised on pasture. According to the AGA, it's been fed 100% forage-based diet, no antibiotics and hormones by us. Even the USDA's grass-fed label means a forage-based diet. So with grass finished, it can mean almost anything to anybody, and I'm suspect of it. It's a self-made claim. So until the USDA addresses it, it's really meaningless. It's either grass-fed or it's not. It's kind of like it's either sugar-free or it's not. It's one of those self-made claims. Yavashi, you want to weigh in on that one? No. What you're looking for on a beef package for grass-fed is self-serving. But the USDA's grass-fed label claim does not mean no antibiotics. It doesn't mean no hormones. It doesn't mean no confinement. The only label that you'll see on a grass-fed package that means those things is the AGA label, because our 4 tenets are no antibiotics, no hormones, 100% forage-based diet, and no confinement. And those are the things that you're kind of looking for when you think of a grass-fed label claim.
Okay, great. Thank you. Country of origin labeling has been in the news quite a bit lately. Could someone explain what this label is and why it's important?
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. So country of origin labeling is something that's been around for a little while now, and it applies mostly to muscle cut or ground meats, so beef and pork, things like that you find in the grocery store, and it essentially requires exactly what it sounds like, that the country of origin show up on the label. It's been in the news a lot lately because it's been an issue before the World Trade Organization. In June, the U.S. House of Representatives voted to repeal COOL requirements, country of origin labeling requirements, and there's legislation in the U.S. Senate now that would weaken COOL to the point where it's effectively a repeal. It would essentially make the labeling voluntary. And COOL is something that I think probably makes sense to consumers on a pretty basic level, and we want to know more about where our food comes from. We think that producers who are close to us, who are local or within the United States, should sort of be held up as doing a good job, and so the attacks on the COOL label just sort of like fundamentally I think don't sit well with consumers, and it's why it's been kind of a contentious issue and something that's shown up in the news for a while. From my organization's perspective, despite an adverse ruling with the World Trade Organization recently, we hope that Congress is not going to move to repeal country of origin labeling requirements before the World Trade Organization process is complete, because it is something that really is a benefit to producers within the U.S. and a benefit to consumers in that it shares additional information about what they are purchasing.
Yavashi, country of origin labeling has been around for 20 years. It was enacted 20 years ago, and it's been fought for the last 20 years. It's one of those things that it's hard to define when you're in big meat packing plants because you're commingling meat from all around the world. But for American family farms and farmers, it's an important rule. But it's one of those things that consumers should support if you want to support American family farms and farmers.
Yeah, and I think a lot of consumers do, and our survey data shows that people want to know where their meat comes from, just like they want to know where lots of things come from. I think really when it came to labeling with multiple countries of origin, that's what sort of got everybody's knickers in a knot, so to speak. And I think Canada and Mexico would have just preferred to have it just labeled U.S. and not have anything having to do with Canada or Mexico on the package. And it's interesting because they're not fighting that labeling for their consumers, but they're certainly fighting that labeling for our consumers. And I think that's a sort of duality that is a little bit of a contradiction that exists. But overall, we know that consumers want this, and it really is a very fascinating example of how the World Trade Organization can actually override the will of our people and the will of our Congress and our laws.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to, we'll do one more question for you all, and then we can get to the audience questions. And let's try to end on a positive note here. And which labels do you all think are the most meaningful for animal welfare and sustainability? What should folks be looking for in the grocery store?
I mean, for us, there's really, I think people should think of sustainability as a continuum, and not every store has every single credible label out there. So to the degree you can educate yourselves on the labels that do mean something out there and know the labels that don't mean anything out there, then you should be able to sort of thread a needle and make at least a decent choice for yourself no matter what. For us, the very bottom rung of sustainable production is that no antibiotics label, and that doesn't mean we don't think sick animals should be treated with antibiotics, and that's almost a separate discussion. But that said, that label at least ensures something with regard to drug use, and we feel like that is the very first step of sustainability. As you move up that continuum, you start to get to things like organic, which we talked about, that requires organic feed. It is non-GMO. It is very careful pesticide control. And it is some animal welfare, but again, not comprehensive. You get to labels like Kerry's label, AGA, or the GAP labels 1 through 5, which all are gradations, right? And as you move up them, the standards become more and more robust. At GAP 4 and 5, you're starting to get pasture involved into those standards as well. Animal welfare approved is also another great animal welfare labels. And here's an interesting note. They will not certify confined animal operations. Certified Humane, on the other hand, will. That doesn't mean that Certified Humane has no value. For us, we think it is a meaningful label out there. It doesn't have as much meaning as a label that, say, is addressing confinement in its standards. But that said, it is raising a bar, and it is providing more value than the conventional baseline. So those are just some examples for us of labels that do carry value for animal welfare. People should also know there's a whole host of fair trade claims, and the intersection with meat production is probably in its infancy, but I think we will start to see more and more of those on the market. Ag Justice Certified is one label claim that's used on produce now and is being used on organic farms, but it has a lot to do with worker welfare and whether they're exposed to pesticides, and I think we will start to see that faction of food labels start to move into animal labels as well in the not too distant future.
Hiroshi, can you cite the eco label or the website or webpage where you all have done all
yeah, I'm not a good promoter. So greenerchoices.org is our website where we house all of our label ratings and evaluations. If you go there, database and literally search up these labels to see what they mean. We're also providing some interesting comparative sheets, so you can type in chicken on greenerchoices.org and actually compare all of the labels you'll find on chicken, from natural to free range to cage free to organic to animal welfare approved, the whole gamut, against about 20 different criteria that we look at for sustainability, and see for yourselves what they do and what they don't do. And we're learning that people want to know more and more about those discrete practices, and the only way to communicate that is literally to communicate that. So those tables provide that kind of comparative rating that we do, so you can see how the labels stack up.
On our side, I'll just jump in and keep the resource train rolling. We're about to launch a new site, as I mentioned in my introduction, called buyingpoultry.com. It's been developed specifically to help make this problem easier. We worked with a group of animal welfare experts and poultry farmers and developed a ranking system, basically a meta ranking system, to rank all of the certifications and claims in the market. And then we built a database of several thousand products. Basically, any product you can find in a grocery store we'll have on the website, and graded every product on the market based on the certifications and claims that they carry. So our expert committee decided that some claims, let's say like free range, without an additional certification, are not a passing grade. They're a failing grade. That product was very likely raised on a factory farm or a farm that looks very similar, that did not provide enough conditions or improvements for animal welfare. On the other side, products that get a passing grade, on the happy positive side, are, as Urvashi talked about, so products that have a label from Certified Humane are graded right in the middle with a C grade, but we call those within poultry better products. The problem specifically with poultry, and I'm not speaking about other animal products now, is that upwards of 99% of all poultry raised in America today, 8.5 billion chickens and turkeys, are raised on factory farms, or raised on conventional large confinement farm operations. So, while we don't love maybe getting a C in school, a C in the poultry industry is actually really quite good. I mean, this is less than 1% of the market today. When we move up the chain a little further into the B grades and A grades, products that receive A and B grades are really outstanding. These are the products that are pasture raised, that are GAP steps 4 and 5, that are animal welfare approved. And then we have a category of products that sort of even go higher than what the current animal welfare standards call for, which are address the genetic welfare, issues of the actual genetics of the birds that are raised. And this is really specific to poultry, but the poultry industry has gone in one very particular direction with breeding birds to grow fast and produce a lot of eggs, which has had a huge impact on their health and requires then the use of antibiotics, as Urvashi has talked about. And so for us, the products that are in grade A that we really call the best in the market are those that raise birds with completely healthy genetics that were never connected to a factory farm, either through their parents or grandparents. And that's a really small percentage of the market today. I mean, tiny percentage of the market. So most consumers, when they go into their local grocery store or big box store, are not going to find those products readily available. But you will find probably a better product. You'll probably find something that has Certified Humane or GAP Step 2 to 3. And those products you can get at major chains. And Buying Poultry will help people find the retail stores closest to them that carry those products. So I'll do just a little shameless plugging.
It's going to be on the consumer for a while to ask for those products and to look for those products, because a lot of them aren't labeled. And know your farmer, know your food. That's an important label. But as far as the grass-fed claim, when you go into a big box store and you see grass-fed, unless it has the AGA label, I would, and I'm, again, thank you, Andrew, for opening the box on this one. Self-promotion is that you need to ask the question, what does that mean? Because it's allowed in a lot of cases, and Urvashi has done great work, and Consumers has done great work on this. So those resources are important. As far as beef and that kind of thing, if you want true grass-fed in the American marketplace right now, you're going to have to ask or look for our logo. And the more people ask for it, the more it will become available, because retailers will put on stores what people ask for, and we found that to be true. And it's a curve, and it's a hill, and we're climbing it, and we've got great farmers, and our website, of course, promotes that, and we're always here to answer questions. So again, the resources are there. It's a beginning. It's a destination, not an end. So we're looking forward to you all asking us the questions.
I think I'll just add at the end that the USDA label is one that I think you can look to for some strong animal welfare standards, even though there are things left to be done. As Urvashi's pointed out, it addresses antibiotic use. It also doesn't allow GMO feed. I mean, some of the other animal welfare labels allow for GMO feed. So it requires animals to be fed a 100% organic diet. So there are some things that should be pointed out that the USDA organic label does require that are good and that are things that we would, I guess, imagine if we were sort of imagining the perfect animal welfare label.
Great, thank you all. I wanted to jump back to a great question we received from Lewis at Binghamton University, specifically regarding cage-free eggs at a large scale. And his question says, at Binghamton University, we are debating whether to switch to all cage-free eggs, but I am pushing for a label with more reliability than cage-free. How sustainable can our egg supply be while procuring the amount of eggs needed to feed about 15,000 people a day? Is cage-free the best we can feasibly do? Are there large-scale sustainable egg providers?
I'm happy to take a first pass at that, just because we've been working with some universities recently as part of our work with buyingpoultry.com, and the answer is definitely. The answer is yes, absolutely. There are large producers in the marketplace today. When I say large, I mean people that are not backyard farmers, people that are raising tens or hundreds of thousands of hens at a time, but doing it in a much higher welfare system. Certified Humane, we've talked about that label. That label actually has a couple of tiers. It has a free-range tier and a pasture-raised tier. Those tiers are really meaningful in our minds from an animal welfare perspective, and are still widely available in the market. There are major producers who you can find on buyingpoultry.com who get a B grade, give all their birds outdoor access, or raise them primarily on pasture, and still raise birds in big numbers. And depending on where you are in the country, some of them are only regionally available, but oftentimes they're available nationally. And just to name a few, Wilcox, Pete and Jerry's, Happy Eggs, Vital Farms. These are producers with certifications that are very meaningful from an animal welfare perspective, and are already being purchased by institutional buyers. University of Berkeley, working with a bunch of schools in the Bay Area who are already purchasing these products. So it's definitely doable, and I would say I'd be happy to help you if that would be useful.
I'd just jump in too. Thanks, Andrew. I think that's right. Organic is another good option. Cages aren't allowed in organic for egg-laying hens, and again, if you see organic even plus certified humane, that's even a higher value. And so kind of what we're talking about, these different labels sometimes have different attributes they're addressing, and sometimes two labels are better than one alone. But organic's another important label to look for in looking for sustainable eggs too.
So we have just about a minute left. If there are any last questions, we could probably take about one more.
I would just say as a last remark, if there are no other questions, that I'm really pleased to see how much these products are now being pushed into the mainstream market. I mean, even just in the last couple of years that I've been working on poultry specifically, products that carry an animal welfare certification from GAP or Certified Humane or AWA are becoming increasingly common. Major producers are starting to develop lines of these products and pay attention to these issues. Consumers are saying not just we want transparency, but we want verification, and we need to see these labels. And retailers and producers will respond. And it gives advocates, when consumers do demand these products, it gives us an easy, a leverage. It gives us leverage. It gives us a tool to say to retailers and producers, guys, we need you to carry better products. Consumers want them. We need you to produce products that have a meaningful labels or get certified or no GMOs or animal welfare certifications, because consumers want them. And when we can say that and have data to back it up, that's when it really is going to, it really does change the market. And so I'm super enthusiastic and encouraged by all the progress that's been made in the last couple of years, and I think much of that is due to folks like Ravashi and Kerry's work over the last 2 decades. So hats off mostly to them for making it possible, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's such an important point that people have power in their pockets, right? And so while we want regulations to improve over time, and we want the bottom to come up, and we want the top to get taller, those things take time. And one thing you can do immediately is create a demand at your own store with your own dollars for better food that's produced in a better way. And that speaks volumes. That maybe even is arguably more powerful than pushing for regulation in and of itself. And people really should feel empowered by that. And we are making a difference by shifting demand for better produced food. And these labels are giving us a reliable way to do that.
The other thing that, and we've talked about retail, but the other thing too is that at your farmer's market, make sure you know what's going on at your farmer's market. It's a great first step, but especially for animal proteins, make sure that you ask the questions at your farmer's markets. That's very important, and I think Andrew and everybody on the call will agree with me that it's a great place to go, but make sure that you're asking the right questions, which is, what's your verification at your farmer's market?
Yeah, these are all great points. I think I'll close by saying, that the importance of this for farmers that are doing the right things, that are meeting some of these stringent standards, really can't be overstated. When there are labels in the marketplace that don't come with stringent standards, that don't come with third-party verification, that confuse things for consumers, it ends up hurting those farmers that are doing the right thing and that are trying to both advance good agricultural practices and receive sort of a premium price in the marketplace for the good things that they do. And so knowing your labels and knowing the standards behind them is really a great way to support the farmers out there that are doing the right thing.
Great. Well, I want to give a big thank you to everyone who joined our webinar today. Thank you so much to our panelists, and I'll turn it over to Megan.
All right, thank you so much. Well, I want to also thank all of our amazing panelists today for being a part of this slow meat community today, and also moving forward as we keep looking for these solutions to the conundrum of industrial meat production, helping to guide our consumers and our producers into modes that are more sustainable for all of us. For those of you who are listening and have been as educated and interested as I have been today, these recordings for this webinar, as well as for the two previous ones, will all be available on Slow Food USA's website, slowfoodusa.org. In the middle of September, they'll be posted as a series. That same week, we will have another webinar where we will welcome back Kerry Balcom, along with several other folks who have been integral to the founding of the slow meat community, of the slow meat movement, and they'll be telling the story of slow meat. That's September 24th at 11 a.m. Eastern. So follow our newsletter and Facebook and social media and all those good things to learn more about it. Thank you all so very much for joining us today. It was a really great discussion, and I look forward to many more.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.